No worries.
Welcome to the John Clarence Gomez Show, CJ.
Morning.
How do you become an bubble performer?
Oh, hang on. Let me change my. You don't want the cat, you want me. There we go. Morning. Can you see me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
How do you become an bubble performer?
How did I become a bubble performer?
Yes.
Okay, so I run a kids entertainment company, a kids party company here in Singapore, and I was at a party. Client hired us to do a party, and I saw a clown doing a few giant bubbles. He had some trays on the grass, a couple of big, just round ones, doing the bubbles. I thought, oh, that's so cool. So once the kids had finished, I then, can I have a play? I had a play, and I thought, oh yeah, I want to do this. So I went and bought the kits from the toy shops, and they didn't work. Although the kit said giant bubbles, but it actually found out that the kits were basically made for the UK or for US. So the solution didn't work here. So I then went onto the internet and did some research to find out how I can make giant bubbles. And it took me quite some time to actually find the ingredients that would work, and then get the recipes. And it was, I think it was recipe number 18 that I managed to get some giant bubbles with it. So it took some time. But this was back in 2007. So quite some time ago. And there wasn't that much information on the internet at the time. So yeah, it was a lot of research.
How many
I'm
shows
just going
do
to
you
turn it
perform?
around, shall I?
How many shows do you perform?
Gosh, um, how many shows do I perform? Well,
Yes.
pre-COVID, I could be doing anything from 2 to 5 shows a weekend. Um, Now, obviously, it's very different. It's more online shows. If I do some live shows, most of them are outdoors. Um, so, and it also changes um, depending on the season. So my really busy period, and this is the same for most entertainers, is basically September, October, all the way through to Christmas, because you have the Halloween, and then middle of November is when they start doing all the Christmas events. So that's the really, really busy period. And then over the Christmas weekends, the December weekend shows a day. So a lot of running around, and it keeps me fit.
What is a bubbleologist? Bubbleologist. What is a bubbleologist?
That's a real tongue
Bubbleologist.
twister, isn't it? A bubbleologist.
Yes.
Yeah. What's a bubbleologist? Gosh, I think people have different definitions for it, but for me, it's somebody who works, plays, studies bubbles. Um, so you can have people in the universities doing PhDs on fluid dynamics, and they are bubbleologists because they're using bubbles and soap films. Um, and then you have people who are just out in the parks doing the huge giant bubbles. So they're also bubbleologists. Then you have people like myself who do indoor shows. I do outdoor shows as well, but for the indoor shows, you have to have a very controlled environment. So you're making the cube-shaped bubbles, tetrahedron-shaped bubbles, and you really need to study the bubbles as you're building them to know what's going on with the bubble. You can't just go bubble, 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 bubble. You need to actually look at the bubble, look at the colors changing on the bubble. But then there's also people who are using bubbles for medicine research. So they're actually using air bubbles, and they inject the air bubble with, well, I think it's air, oh, maybe it's air bubble, maybe it's liquid bubble, but they're injecting bubbles which have the medicinal properties in it, and to actually target certain areas within the body. So they're also bubbleologists. So we have a broad range. It's not just people who are playing with bubbles. There's a lot of science and mathematics behind bubbles as well. That's the hidden world that once you get into it, it's just like, oh wow, this is like crazy stuff going on with these bubbles and soap films. And, yeah.
And you have two times Guinness World Records.
Yes, so I was part of a huge group, so it's a participant record. It was organized by a friend in the UK. Well, actually, I shouldn't say UK. She's from Wales. The amazing Dr. Ziggs. They do some amazing bubble kits, and she organized a festival that we called Bubble Days, and it was Bubble Days number 5. And she organized it in Wales, and we had a couple of records. Well, we had lots and lots of bubble records broken that weekend. The 2 I was involved in was the number of participants making giant bubbles, and then the number of people making multiple bubbles. So that was about 327 people all making the bubbles. So we were in this castle, and there was just bubbles everywhere. They were all flying around. It was quite a windy day, so it was a bit like a vortex, and you were just in this middle of these millions of bubbles just swirling around. It was amazing. I also have 2 Singapore records. So in Singapore, we have the Singapore Book of Records. And that one, I have 2 records for the most number of people inside a bubble. So that's using the giant rigs, giant moats, to put people inside the bubble. So I've got 2 Singapore records for that as well. So yeah.
What is CJ Bubble Productions? What is the CJ Bubble Productions?
Okay, well, my name is Caroline Jane Cornelius Jones, which is really long. So I'm CJ. So I thought I'd name my company after myself. So CJ Bubble is my stage name, or CJ the Bubble Girl. So then I just use that to make my company name. So it's CJ Bubble Productions. And within that, I do stage shows, I do photo shoots, we have the photo booth, I do workshops, I also make and sell the bubble kits, whether it's for home study, to learn how to make dome-shaped bubbles and cube-shaped bubbles at your table, or the giant bubble kits for outdoor play. So basically anything to do with bubbles. We've also provided bubbles for people like Dyson, because when they're using their fans, they have a demonstration. So they need the bubble kits and the bubble juice for that. So yeah, we've provided that to Dyson Singapore. I've also flown out to Brunei to perform for the Sultan of Brunei for his daughter's birthday party. So lots and lots of different facets to CJ Bubble Productions, but basically anything to do with bubbles.
Do you perform in many countries and festivals?
Yes, I'm based in Singapore, so I'm mainly here and in the Southeast Asia region. But yeah, I've performed in China. I was flown out to Mumbai, India last year to perform for Dumbo, the movie. So they were having Disney were having an opening festival there for that. And within the Dumbo movie, there are bubbles. And those bubbles were created by another bubble friend, Sam, the bubble man from the UK. So we have this community of bubbleologists around the world. So yeah, it's really fun getting to travel. I do a few festivals. It's mainly shows. Because also, I mean, here in Southeast Asia, it's really hot. So you have to be a bit careful on being out in the sun for 6 hours. You get fried. So it's like slather up with sunscreen and cover everything up. I wear long sleeve everything when I'm doing some long events, all day events. But at the moment it's raining here, so it's a bit tricky to do the outdoor stuff. You have to go in between the rainstorms. What's the weather like for you? Is it
Sunny.
hot? Is it rainy season for you? Sunny. Oh yes, I can see a bit. Yeah. But then rain's good for the bubbles because the bubbles love humidity. So if you can go out bubbling just after it's rained, that's really good. And even if it's raining just a little bit, depends. I mean, in Southeast Asia, when we have the monsoon rains, you can't bubble because the raindrops are so big, they just kill the bubbles. But in the West, when it rains, it can be a much finer rain. So you can bubble in the rain in the UK and some areas of the US. But here you also have to be careful because if you have a thunderstorm, you've got lightning. And if you've got your giant rods, you're like 2.5 meter, 3 meter rods, you don't want to be swinging those around in a thunderstorm. You don't want to be zapped by lightning.
It is easy to become a bubble performer. It is very easy to become a bubble performer.
Is it easy to become a bubble performer?
Yes, yes.
I think a lot of people would say yes, but there's two strings to that. One, you have to be a good performer, and then you also have to be good with bubbles. So some people within our community are amazing bubbleologists, but they don't perform. They just like going out doing the super giant bubbles, and they do it for themselves, for their own pleasure. Other people like being on stage, like performing. I love performing. I love being in front of an audience. So I've built up the bubble shows to suit different audiences, to suit different environments. So I basically have 3 different types of shows I do. I have a kids indoor birthday party or family day show. I have an outdoor show. And then we get a lot of company dinner and dances here. So they have them in the ballrooms, huge stage and stuff. So I do an adult show as well.
Do you
So you have to find your niche. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you perform with people like me because I have an autism? Do you perform with people do you perform in front of people with autism?
Yeah, I've done shows for special kids, for special schools. We have some very good schools here that cater for these types of kids. So I do shows for them. And then you have to change how you do that type of show. Sometimes my whole audience is in wheelchairs, so they can't come up onto stage. So I then have to go to them. And there's also, I mean, there's so many different levels and spectrums. So I get to the show a bit earlier, I get to the venue a bit earlier, and then I'm just looking at the audience, seeing what they're like. Some kids have very little interaction with humans, but if you put a bubble in front of them, you'll see them tracking their bubble with their eyes. Or if you put some foam on their hands, suddenly they become alive and animated. Bubbles are amazing. They're a wonderful bridge that can bridge people, and it helps people with different types of learning to be able to engage with the world. The bubbles just draw them in, and then they focus on the bubbles and can engage. And it's wonderful watching that. You see people just opening up and blossoming just from bubbles. So yeah, sometimes those are some of the best shows from the reactions you get from the kids. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps talking about these types of shows. I don't do a lot of them, but they're wonderful to do.
It is very fun to perform with bubbles. It is very fun.
Yeah, I love performing with the bubbles. They just bring so much joy. You can't be angry when you're blowing bubbles. Just doesn't work. We have a saying in the community that you can't say bubbles in an angry voice. Bubbles, bubbles. It's still like it's still fun. And doesn't matter who you're performing to or the age. The joy you see on their faces, and then that's infectious for me. So yeah, it's so fun performing with bubbles. It's very joyful. So I've always got a smile on my face, and most of the time, most of the audience has too. So yeah, we feed off each other, which is nice.
How many years do you perform that? How many years do you perform bubbles?
How many years have I been performing?
Yes.
Yeah. I started, I rediscovered bubbles in about 2007. And then it took me a year, maybe a year and a half, of working out the bubble solutions, working out a show. I was able to do, earlier on, I was able to do just some of the big ones, but I wanted to do the indoor shows. I wanted to make the cube-shaped bubbles. But finding the equipment was tricky. You could get it, but it would have to be shipped in from either Europe or the US, and very, very expensive shipping fees. So I would go to my local hardware stores and ask them for stuff, and they would sort of look at me and sort of, oh, this crazy girl is asking us for things. We just want to be the mechanics. And then also a little bit of the language barrier as well. So I'd just be showing them what I wanted to do, and they'll go off into the back and bring me forward different pieces of equipment and stuff. And but I think for my indoor shows, I probably started performing those 2008, 2009. But it always changes because there's somebody discovers a new powder that we can use in our bubble solutions. So we all like try that, and that means that we can change the way we do the bubbles. Because my first solutions weren't very good. So I'd have to do my show to suit the solution. And now I've got some really good solutions. And I can do more complicated bubble sculptures and routines and things. So you're always learning with bubbles. You always need to play and explore. Have you ever played with any giant bubbles, John?
No, but when I was a children, I love to play bubbles.
Yeah,
Do you know
that's most of us.
do you know the bubble gun? The bubble gun.
Yes.
The bubble gun. When you press the many bubbles, we there are many bubbles.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an easy one for the kids to
And
use.
the bubble machine. Do you know bubble machine that's used in weddings, in birthday? Bubble machine.
Yes. Yeah. So they chuck out hundreds and hundreds of bubbles, don't they? then yeah, the kids are all there popping and stuff. So yeah,
What is
and
your
it just brings so much joy, even the little ones.
what is your feeling when you are performing with many people? What is your feeling when you are performing with many people? Are you very, very happy?
Yes, yeah. I like the bigger audiences. The bigger the audience, the more emotion you get from them. If it's, and it depends on the venue. I mean, if you've got a big venue and you've got a very small audience, you have to really fill the stage to get the emotion and out to the audience, and then for the audience to feed back to you. If you're in a small, intimate space, it's a different type of show. But yes, it's always nice having a big audience, and then you get a lot of emotion from them, a lot of reaction from them. And as a performer, you react to that as well. So although I have a set routine, I quite often ad lib during the show, because somebody might say something, and so then I react to that, or some kid does something and then I react to that. So you don't just go through your show going number one, number two, number three, number four, number five. You've got to be quite fluid, I suppose, and be flexible with it, and take it as it comes. And then also you have to do that with the bubbles, because you never know when a bubble is going to pop. So it could be halfway through your routine, a bubble pops, you've got to start again, or you have to change that routine into something else. Otherwise it looks like, oh no, bubble popped. Oh dear, what am I going to do? Sorry, audience, let me start again. And that just, it feels very, it's not very good for the audience. It's not very well rehearsed. So one of the tips, if you're going to be a bubble performer, is you've got to have what we call pop lines. So if your bubble pops, how are you going to react to that pop? Are you going to make it funny? You don't want to make it look, well, you could make it look sad, but if you're going to make it look sad, you've got to almost exaggerate that, make that a bit comic. If you just look sort of, oh no, it's popped, what am I going to do? Then you bring the emotion level down of the audience. So you have to come up with pop lines. What you say when your bubble pops, what you do when your bubble pops. Can you turn that routine into another routine? So the audience don't realize that something went wrong, and they just think it's part of the show. So it's always, yeah, watching to see what's going on within your show and adapting to it. So you have to be a bit flexible.
This is the last question before we end. What is your message to
Okay.
other
Wow.
Bubbleologists and bubble performer? Can you give them some tips? What is your message to other Bubbleologists and bubble performer? Can you give them some tips?
Sure. So if you want to become a bubbleologist, or a bubble performer, um, the main thing, as with any skill, you need to practice. Practice, practice, practice. Just play with your bubbles. Um, you, there's no such thing as the perfect bubble juice. You have to adapt your juice, your bubble juice, to the environment, to your situation. So people say, oh, what's the best recipe? There is no best recipe. You have to change. So in my shows, in my indoor shows, I actually use 3 different bubble solutions, because they have different jobs. If I'm doing like a really foamy bubble, I don't want to use the bubble solution I use for my big bubbles, because that's quite sticky and it just makes it messy foam. So I use a really, really cheap toy store bubble solution for foam. But if I'm doing tricks that I want the bubble to last a long time, then that's a very different solution from the ones where I'm doing the huge ones, because those bubbles need to be much more flexible. So it's about just playing with your bubbles and understanding how they react in different environments. So if it's hot and dry when you're performing, how does your bubble react? Is it going to pop much faster? It's going to dry out much faster, which means you have to speed up your performance of making that bubble or that sculpture, whatever you're doing, which means you've got to think about, do I just do lots more tricks and routines, or do I pad it out with talks and jokes and interaction with the audience? So the main thing is just to go out and play with your bubbles, play with them in different situations, whether it's really hot or really cold or really humid or really dry. Also understand if you're out and it's really windy, what type of equipment you'll be able to get some results from with that. And there's no point if you're doing a show and something isn't working, don't just keep on doing the same thing, just change it up. So you need to know how to do that. I've been out bubbling doing shows next to a construction site. It's really dusty. You don't see the dust, but it pops the bubbles. So I couldn't do any of the really big bubbles and I had to change my routine and stuff. So use what and then for your solutions, use what you can get, because what works for me in Singapore is very different for what works for somebody in in the US and in different states in the US, because if it's hot and dry, you need a different bubble solution. Here in Singapore, it's hot and humid. My solution is different again. So it changes all the time. For me, I'm quite lucky because Singapore is always hot and humid. It doesn't change too drastically. I don't have to change my solution very much. But if you're somewhere that has a lot of seasons, so your temperature changes, your humidity changes, you have to change your solution to suit that. So it's all about studying, looking at your bubbles and just playing with them and practice, and using what you can get locally. There's no point just buying really expensive equipment before you can actually make the basic bubbles. It's like everybody says, don't run before you can walk. So just keep playing with your bubbles, keep practicing. And that's also, I mean, they'll bring you so much joy anyway. So half the time it's not work when you're doing the shows and when you're playing with your bubbles. It's so much fun. But then if you want to be a bubble performer and you want to get booked, then you've got to do all the business back end of that. So that's when all the hard work starts, because then you have to start marketing yourself and have all your business plans in place. And as performers, I hate all that side, and then I have to do all the accounting. It's just like, I don't want to do that. I just want to play with my bubbles and do bubble shows. But if you want to be paid to be a performer, you've got to do the business side of it as well. So then you need to go do research on that as well. So we end up being not jack of all trades, but we end up having a lot of skills. So I have to do a little bit of bookkeeping, I have to do my invoicing, I have to do a bit of marketing. So you, as a performer, you're an entrepreneur basically, unless you work for somebody else and they just give you the jobs. But if you're working for yourself and wanting to get your own bookings, you're basically an entrepreneur. So you need to understand that side of it, the business side of it as well. Yeah.
CJ, thank you for guesting to my podcast.
You're welcome. It was lovely talking to you.
Yes. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Bye. Have a great week.
Bye.
Bye.